Russia tomorrow.
But first of all, I would like to ask you about the level of relationships, diplomatic relationships between the UK and Russia. Is there any relationships?
Well, I think one of the sad things about this war and about the implications of the decisions that Vladimir Putin has made is that relations between the UK and Russia, of course, have deteriorated hugely. I remember when I was a young man, when I was a child, Russia was behind the Iron Curtain. It was isolated, and it had a very bad reputation in the West. And then, when the Berlin Wall came down, when the inner German border came down, the Iron Curtain came down, we had a much better relationship with Russia. Vladimir Putin himself visited London and met with our Queen, and there was an opportunity to build a really strong relationship with Russia. Yeah. But when President Putin decided to attack Ukraine, to attempt to invade Ukraine, relations, of course, have diminished very badly. We still speak with some Russian officials when we have the opportunity to. But unfortunately, the president's decisions to invade Ukraine have damaged Russia's reputation on the international stage, damaged the ability to conduct diplomacy, and of course, is killing thousands of young Russians in his attempted invasion.
So you said some level of communication is still there. Could you recall what is that? What do you talk about, if ever?
Well, I've personally not been able to have a meaningful conversation with my Russian opposite number, Sergei Lavrov. But I know my defense counterparts have on rare occasions had the opportunity to speak with Russian defense ministers. But what we're seeing across the much of the world is countries that used to enjoy a good relationship with Russia, a professional relationship with Russia, are now rejecting Russia. And this is not just in the West, this is in many, many parts of the world.
Russia has suspended this New START treaty, as you know. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin was talking about that. What's your reaction on that?
Well, I think that this is, and you know, if the decision is implemented, I think this would be a very unfortunate step. The points that we have made from the start of this is there have never been any threats to Russia. We have never sought to remove Vladimir Putin as Russia's leader. The decision for who governs Russia is a decision exclusively for the Russian people. But talk of withdrawing from these agreements, I think, is a very unfortunate step. It's an unnecessary step, and it is one that I really hope the Russian leadership, including President Putin himself, will realize is a mistake and that they will reverse.
Do you think that when Vladimir Putin and others talk about the nuclear weapons that they are ready to use, a lot of representatives of Russian state are saying that they're considering this tool. Do you think they're serious?
Well, we of course take very seriously any conversations about nuclear weapons, but I think it's really important for your viewers to understand there is not, and there has never been, a threat to Russia itself. No other country is discussing or threatening nuclear weapons use. And what we would say is that we should not threaten or discuss the use of these kind of weapons. We have had many, many decades where there has been no threat of their use. And what I would say, and I've said this recently, this war could stop today if Vladimir Putin, if President Putin realized that he has made a terrible mistake attempting to invade Ukraine, he could end this war. And we would like nothing more than for him to withdraw his troops, restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, and bring this war to a conclusion.
Yesterday, Putin was saying that he is ready to consider particular countries for the separate negotiations on the arm controls situation. Can London start this kind of negotiations with Russia? Is it possible?
All conflicts end with negotiations, and if President Putin were to make it clear that he intends to withdraw his troops, restore the territorial integrity of Ukraine, respect the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, and no longer threaten his neighbors, then that is the kind of thing that we would need to hear for meaningful negotiations to take place. But at the moment, we are not hearing that. We are hearing more aggression, we're hearing more threats, and we are sadly seeing more Ukrainians being targeted by Russian weapons. So we're not hearing anything that indicates at the moment that President Putin is serious about peace and serious about negotiations.
But what he says and what Russian officials are saying every day on air, propaganda delivers these messages from them 24/7, is that the West is delivering arms to Ukraine, and that is why this war is still going on. So I can understand the cynicism of the situation, but still, I have a particular question for you. Do you think that the delivery of fighter jets is a good idea?
Well, it's incredibly important that your viewers remember the sequence of events here. The decision by President Putin to attempt to annex Crimea by sending troops into Donbass region, and then in February of last year to initiate a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. These were his decisions, unprovoked, unnecessary, illegal, and exclusively his decisions. There was no threat to Russia from the West or indeed anywhere else. That was the decision that he made. This was condemned by the whole world at the United Nations, and we agreed that Ukraine had the right to defend itself against the invasion that President Putin initiated. That is why we're supporting Ukraine. That is why we are giving them military equipment to defend themselves against the invasion that Vladimir Putin initiated. And if he genuinely believes that there should be no more weapons going into Ukraine, he should withdraw his weapons from Ukraine, respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, and bring this war to a conclusion.
Do you have any vision of when this long-range systems and fighter jets reach Ukraine, or it's unclear so far?
Well, I think you'll have to forgive me that I'm not comfortable discussing that level of detail. But the message that we send is that we want Russia, we want Ukraine, we want the countries in the region to live in peace. That is our desired goal. And we want to make it clear that the Ukrainians will defend themselves, and we will support them until President Putin has withdrawn Russian troops, ended the killing, and allowed Ukraine to live in peace and security.
What do you think about the possibility of Russian territory, official Russian territory, gets under attack? Is there a possibility of, escalation in this case?
Well, I want your viewers to understand that in the UK, in Western Europe, in America, there is a huge amount of respect for Russians, for Russian history, for Russian culture. This is the country that gave us Pushkin. This is the country that gave us arts and culture. There is a huge amount of inherent respect for your country's history, your country's culture. But the decisions that Vladimir Putin is making is causing huge damage to Russia's reputation on the world stage. But there is no desire to damage Russia, and there is certainly no desire to destroy Russia. What there is a desire to bring this war to a swift conclusion, so that no more young Russian soldiers and members of the armed forces have to die, and that no more Ukrainians are killed in this conflict. This is what we want to achieve. This is why we're supporting Ukraine, is to bring this war to a conclusion quickly, and then re-establish more normal, peaceful relations around Europe that we enjoyed for so many decades after the end of the Cold War.
Do you support the idea of tribunal for Vladimir Putin and others?
Well, the sad truth is that we have seen terrible violations of human rights on the battlefield. We see images from Bucha. We see very credible reports of rape and murder. And the people who have conducted those actions or who have ordered those actions have to be held accountable. So I think it's important. We support the International Criminal Court. I think it's important that people realize, at whatever level, no matter how senior, if they make the decisions to use murder and rape as a weapon of war, then the international community will expect them to be held to account. And we feel very, very strongly about this. And this is why we think it is important that those who are perpetrating these atrocities or ordering these atrocities to happen will be held to account.
Is there a threat of occupation of Moldova or maybe Georgia? Because we can see that there is a particular escalation in terms of Moldova and Russia's plans. Is it serious in your opinion?
Well, what we have seen over many years is President Putin ordering Russian troops into other countries. We saw this, we've seen this with Georgia, we saw this with Crimea, we see Russian troops in Moldova, we see Russian troops in other countries in the region. And so when a country tells us that it is fearful that Vladimir Putin will order Russian troops to invade their country, we have to take their concerns seriously. The Moldovans have said they are concerned about Vladimir Putin interfering in their country, and of course we have to take those concerns seriously because of the history of President Putin's behavior.
The final question, everyone is looking forward to the end of the war because it's been a year already, and it's devastating for millions of people, for Ukrainians, but also for Russians. And we have a feeling that Russia is also under attack. So when do you think this war ends, and how do you think it ends? I know that it's a broad question, but at least do you have a feeling that it may end in 2023?
Well, I've visited Kyiv, I've visited Ukraine, I've seen the destroyed buildings, I've seen the memorials to the Ukrainians who have been killed. And it is terrible and it is very sad. But I also know that there are Russian families, there are Russian mothers and fathers whose children went off to what they thought was a military exercise in Belarus and never came home. There are huge numbers of Russians who are being killed and injured in a war that was completely unnecessary, and that damage to that loss of life, both Ukrainian but also Russian, is incredibly sad. And of course, everybody, including Russians, should want this war to end soon. But it's incredibly important that we re-establish the truth. The global rule that has kept us safe is that you cannot just invade neighboring countries and have the world sit by and watch it happening. So that is why we want this war to end, but we want this end to be a just conclusion. We want Vladimir Putin to withdraw Russian troops from Ukraine. We want Ukraine to be restored to its territorial integrity, and we want Ukraine to be able to live in peace, just as we would want every other country to be able to live in peace and security.
Do you think Russia has a chance? The democracy in Russia? Do you think Russian civil society has a chance?
Well, I hope so. I mean, as I say, Russia has such an amazing history, amazing arts, amazing culture, a fantastic opportunity to be a peaceful and successful country, fully engaged on the world stage. That is the Russia that we would all want to see. That Russia is possible, but that can only be the case when countries around Russia's borders no longer feel that the Russian leadership sees them as places that can be attacked or invaded. So we want to see peace, we want to see security, and we want to see this war come to a conclusion.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times. They got us on the 6th day of the war in Ukraine.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We left Russia, but we kept going. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia, the war, and Russian society in English as well.
Kherson is Putin's 3rd major defeat in a row.
What is wrong with the Russian army?
Stories no one else can tell you. Hear it right from the source. Subscribe to our channel.